My name is Amy Stone. I'm the host of a show called The Art of Imperfect Adulting. And today I'm here to talk about podcast rankings. Or another way I would say this is audio podcasting's dirty little analytics secret. So let's get to it, shall we? There is a company, let's see, I'm also using a new tool for this video, so we'll see how it works out. There is a company called Listen Notes. And I'm going to try and share my screen with you for that. And they give a score for most podcasts. My show, The Art of Imperfect Adulting, I've had 3 shows. This is my 3rd show, Art of Imperfect Adulting, the Amy Says So Show, and Mile After Mile podcast. The Art of Imperfect Adulting currently has a score of 34 and is given a top 5% global rank. So that sounds awesome, right? And I'm super proud of what I've created and what I'm doing. But I also look at my data every day, as well as a lot of industry news. And I know how many people are estimated to, download or watch the show. So I know that I don't have a big show, actually. I know that it's not listened to by as many people as the top shows. And I have long thought that this was confusing. And I currently think, and this is my opinion, that this confusion may be harmful to both indie creators like myself, but also advertisers and sponsors. I think that it might be one of the things that could lead to burnout for solo creators. And I don't have advertisers on this show at this time, but I think that it might lead to frustration and unmet expectations. That's just my guess. One of the things that initially prompted me to be doubtful of the accuracy of these data is what I'm about to show you again. I'm going to go back and show you that Listen Notes screen, but I'm going to show you an old show. So if I go back to my profile, and I have these 3 shows. This was my first show, right? And it's called Mile After Mile. It was stories about endurance athletes. I loved it. It was a hobby podcast. It has not released an episode since 2020, maybe 2018. And it shows that it's still a top 3% podcast. It doesn't even exist. I don't even think you can find it anywhere. So it made me wonder, like, what does this even mean, right? What does it even mean? And today I'm just going to show you some of my thoughts about this whole thing. And I'm not anti Listen Notes, right? And I'll tell you that. I learned a little bit about Listen Notes as I put this together, and I'm going to share with you what I've learned. The reason that I'm doing this is that my goal here actually is building a media company. And one of the things that's really important to me as an individual, as a person, is transparency. I happen to think for myself that it's helpful to be brutally honest and transparent about what's really going on. So I'm going to go take a second and go down a little rabbit hole, though, about the person who made Listen Notes, because honestly, you guys, this is kind of awesome. And then I'm going to come back and share some other stuff about it, which, we'll go from there. So we'll go back to this website, which is the Listen Notes website. And if we go all the way down to the bottom, there's an about page. And they talk about what it is. They have all this data. It was designed as a search engine, which I actually was not really using it as that until I began to do this. So this guy, whose name is Wenbin Fang, built this because he wanted it. He's like a super listener of podcasts. For a long time, it was just one guy. And even though it might still be a small team, it looks like they may still work in a small co-working space in San Francisco. And I love this very, very much. And I took some time and I want to show you. I looked him up on LinkedIn, which is, the way we stalk people in 2026. So this is a LinkedIn account that might or might not be his, right? I do hope it is. In his about section, he says, I don't connect with you on LinkedIn if we've never met in person. Please don't message me because I don't read the LinkedIn messages. And then he gives an email address, which I did not send anything to, wembin@listennotes.com. This is a level of do not bug me that I aspire to achieve someday. I just want to say that. True story, unrelated to this particular thing with Listen Notes. But many years ago in my 20s, I worked with a guy who was a designer, and he went on vacation for a week, 2 weeks, whatever it was. And we back in the olden days in the 1900s, we used to set up what was called an out of office reply when you were on vacation. And this guy set up his office out of office reply that when you sent him an email, it would come back and said, I'm on vacation. If you need to reach me, if it's an emergency, you can reach me at 1-800-DON'T-BOTHER-ME.com. Sorry, I got that wrong. 1-800-DON'T-BOTHER-ME, I'm on vacation.com or something like that, which is like a nonsense response, but also was like, I'm not available. And it still makes me chuckle when I think about that. So he builds Listen Notes because he listens to a lot of podcasts. And what drives him to design this is the crappiness of search options within podcast players. And honestly, that's still true today. So I am in full support of his. And I wasn't really using Listen Notes as a search engine until I started poking around in this. I use it to look up my show to see how it's doing. I use it to check on other people's shows to see if they look like they're up and running before I guest on them. But once I read that about him, I did mess around with it, and it does work so much better than other things are out there that I do think that that's really, really good. So he built this very cool tool that is out there searching and pulling data about RSS feeds all the time. And then he built his own database that you can search. And he ranks the shows. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, because I think it's both fabulous and also it's a little bit confusing to people who may or may not know what these rankings mean. And that's pretty much everybody who's not a podcaster, because I'm not sure that very many people care. But if I understand this correctly, before we go into this, he is out there pulling data that's out there essentially for free and then giving it back to me in a better interface. That's fine. It's a very smart thing to do. But here's what I'm going to call him out and say he's an absolute genius for. You can pay him for it. And there's another search engine service that does this for podcasts called Raphonic. And they give you a little bit of data, but if you want more, you have to pay for it. So he takes something that he can pull for free and then offers to sell it back to me for a price. That is a genius business model. Good job, you, sir. All right. So the top show in the world is usually quoted as being Joe Rogan or The Daily. Truthfully, because not everybody plays in the same sandbox, I wonder if there are some serious shows that might be roughly that size that we just don't talk about because they're distributed via radio also, but it's not a topic for today. So give that. So if you look up Joe Rogan, and I'll do that just for fun, I'll go back into Listen Notes and I will search for Joe Rogan. I have my teleprompter covering the screen so I can't see what I'm doing. But now we get Joe Rogan, right? The Joe Rogan Experience. And it comes up as 0.01. He has a score of 96.01, top of the scale. So here's where it gets a little wonky, right? I've never actually myself seen a score that's lower than 10%. And so right now I'm at 5. I've never really seen one that's lower than 10. I got to 10 a couple days, a week after I launched, very quickly. And so many shows I have learned don't actually ever get to 10%, which I didn't realize until partway through this past year when I began commenting to people like, yeah, no, 10% is as low as it goes. And people are like, what? No, and I would say 10% is basically you've turned on your RSS feed, and people are like, really? Because I'm not there. And so I didn't realize that it was not an automatic thing until I began to hear from people that they had not even ever gotten a score. So when I hit top 5%, it was interesting to me because, it's like you think of it like it's going to be a score in school, like, I'm above 95%, right? And that would be true if the scale was 99 to 1, right? But it's not that, I don't think. And they don't explain this anywhere exactly on the site. So this is my guess. And if I get it wrong and somebody wants to explain to me how it really is, I appreciate that, right? So my first thought was, though, that the real scale was 10, like 10% to where we see on Joe Rogan, 0.01. And that would actually still be a 99-point scale. And if it was that way for real, that a top 5% would put me in the top half of all podcasts, which doesn't resonate with me. I don't think that that's where my show is based on actual volume. And one of the reasons is because if I'm at top 5%, the difference between me and 0.01% or even 1% is enormous, right? Joe Rogan gets millions of downloads. So it's estimated he gets 1 million downloads per episode. That's kind of a wonky statistic because of the way we do it, but that is how we count podcast data. And I know my data, and I'm nowhere near that, right? So I mentioned this. I'll go into a little bit more detail in this just so that I have wandered on about it. Downloads per episode are a crappy way to evaluate streaming shows, in my opinion, because we're not live radio. People stream from a library of shows that they choose from. And so it's not reasonable to look at a single episode and say downloads. It doesn't track for me in terms of the way I think of how we do things. So in 2025, my show had 7,000 verified audio downloads. So 7,000 to 1 million per show. That's the difference between 5% and 0.01%. And so, like, it's not just this start and stop point of this scale. It's that the difference for every little uptick is probably an exponential jump. And so this signifies to me that what we're actually dealing with here is a logarithmic scale. And so I understand the concept of a logarithmic scale to some degree, but I asked my good friend Claude to help me explain it for this video, and they gave me this. A logarithmic scale means that each step isn't adding the same amount, it's multiplying by the same amount. So if you think of a staircase or a ladder, if they were the same step, each one would multiply over and over. So 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 feet, stuff like that. On a logarithmic scale, each step is going to double. So step 1 is 1 foot, step 2 is 2 feet, step 3 is then 4 feet, step 4 is 8 feet, and by 10 feet, but at the 10th rung, you're at 1,024 feet. So it's a much steeper increase, right? So that's potentially why it would be, me at 5%, Joe Rogan at 0.01%. Sounds closer, sounds like 5 percentage points, but it's not. He's got like 10,000 times more downloads than I do, right? For every 100 downloads I might get, he's getting 1 million. That feels like it's probably more on point for how this ranking scale is being oriented. And it feels true. So if the difference here, right, is that if we adjust the scale then to where I actually am in the universe of podcasts, right? Listen Notes tells me I'm top 5%. If we adjust it for a logarithmic adjustment, then I'm closer to the bottom quarter. And that makes more sense to me. And so when I first wrote this, I was going to say that Listen Notes doesn't actually tell us how they figure out the ranking, right? In my research for this video, I realized that the team at Listen Note and Wenbin, they're like most engineers, that they're actually pretty happy to share what they're doing. They just do it in sort of an engineering kind of way, which means that it's not always as straightforward as it might be if like the PR department did it or the marketing department. So I've talked about the scale. I'm gonna share the things I think the site is looking for in order to have a top scale, right? A top score. They are definitely somehow pulling data through the RSS for downloads, and they are also maybe looking at internal numbers as well. Okay. So what I think the scale, and let me see if I can share that with you. Let's see if I can find it again. All right. because I was doing a lot of poking around on this site. So this is the Joe Rogan experience. I've got my profile, and or one of the things that you have to do that helps a lot is you go in and claim your show. Right, they're upfront about that. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so if you go down here, right, they have all these things: listen later, listen clips, blah blah blah, for businesses, so on and so forth. For podcasters, and if I hit here, why should I put my podcast? I don't see my show. How can my show rank number one in search results? So it's here. You do have to know that it's on that menu. There's another place I found to find it. And what they say is it's a complex topic. I'm sure that's true. Ranking, so on and so forth. But they also say that we get new signals over time, number of clicks and plays on the website, and number of clicks and listen later, as well as estimates of downloads from various external services, recommendations, blogs, online media. So they're looking for cues in, make sure I'm actually showing, yeah. They're looking for cues in the greater web like they do for SEO, but they're also giving weight to the things you do in their own universe. And that is the way we do things in 2025, 2026. Every single company is out there trying to create their own silo, their own community, their own sort of universe where they're trying to get people to be. And so how much that influences the ranking on listen notes, I have no way of knowing. But I think that they are pretty upfront about the fact that it is at least going to be something. And so that's fine. Okay. So here's how I would evaluate. Here's how I would change the scale, like what they call it and what it actually means, right? So top 0.01%, that's Joe Rogan territory. That's top of the top. 0.05 is where you'll find Good Hang with Amy Poehler. She just won the Golden Globe. And then you've got 1%. These are very, very, very popular shows. I'm at 5%. Let's say that's a growing indie show. I mean, that might be sort of like flattering to me, right? 10%, I think that 10% just means that they have verified that you have an RSS feed and that your mom has added your subscription to her account, or your husband or your best friend, right? It's like you have figured out how to make it work. That's really what I think that means. And that might seem really unfair, but that is kind of what I think it is. The reason I think this matters to small indie creators like me is that with a more accurate sense of the scale, and I'm in no way saying that listen notes should change how they're doing. This is just my opinion, me ranting on the internet. But if we're more accurate and understanding about what the scale means, that gives us a different way to celebrate our actual wins without comparing ourselves to the giants of the industry. It means we're better able to create strategic plans for ourselves. If you get 30 downloads per episode and you believe that Listen Notes is ranking you in the top, 5% of podcasts in the globe, you might wonder why you're not out there being approached for sponsorships. But it's because you're still in a tiny little microcosm of of indie artists. So when I'm say I'm top 5% and the top 0.01% is Joe Rogan, we're not 5% apart. We're thousands of times apart in actual audience size. The ranking scale, the way it is done now, makes it sound like I'm in the same ballpark. And honestly, it's like he's playing pro basketball and I'm playing community pickleball. They're not the same. And for advertisers who are much more significant and important to the industry than I am as an individual in so many ways, if they are expecting reach and they're using a scale because it's the only thing that's offered for them, right? So like Listen Notes created this scale just because they wanted to. They call themselves the Nielsen ratings of podcasting, but I don't think that somebody else gave them that title. I think they did. They made this scale because they wanted it, and good for them. But if advertisers are using the information the way it's available to them in this, and they're not getting the results they want, it's not only it's bad, it doesn't deliver it annoys the advertiser, it harms the whole cycle of trust and communications, right? And so when I think about that from the guise of like what I'd actually like to build is a media company and transparent, part of that is being honest about my numbers, which I'm not ashamed of at all. And part of that is shining my tiny little bright little light on the shady corners of this business where I find them. Because if I'm going to ask people to work with me and follow me and trust me, I think it's part of that is that you expect me to be honest and prove to you what I'm doing and what that. It is harder than ever before in 2026 to tell what's real and what's been modified. Whether we're talking about AI, green screens on Zoom, filters on digital photographs, deep plane facelifts on real live human being, or flawed streaming download data, right? So whether it's inaccurate, whether it's structured in a way to make it present like it's something that it's not really, or whether it's just manipulated by real human beings and sort of like click farms and, the data is right, but the tools to get it might be dishonest. All of that is harmful to the industry and the people in it overall. And it's just my opinion, and it's an imperfect opinion, but the solution to this is brutal, transparent honesty and owning your own realistic experience. And what I'm going to say here is that in the age of AI, the ultimate flex is being human, right? It's to show up with your very, very human self and let that be seen for all the things that it is. And that includes all parts of our business and, the no Botox forehead and whatever it might be, right? If everybody is standing around just lying to each other, first of all, that's just weird, right? To change a system where somebody has to go first and say, fine, I'll tell the truth. And that's part of what this is, right? So let's take a look at what I think they're looking for. I showed this before. Your feed works, they're looking for that. That's actually very important. And then somehow it picks up the activity for the active shows. I have no idea how because I can't find it, but they do. And then I think that they are looking for how much you're willing to interact on their website. They offer things where you can do an interview with them. That's something I've done. You can make a playlist, which I did a couple days ago, but I'm not in it. And then they're looking for where you and your show up in other people's listings, right? So this is where, and I don't know how much they're looking for it. Like if you had a community of people on Listen Notes and you were each mentioning each other, it might be helpful. I'm not sure if that's actually what they're looking for or that just looks like to me. I did do myself a Listen Notes interview. I think that everybody who's got an indie podcast should do that. It was fun. It's helpful. I created a playlist just messing around. There's another podcast search engine which is called Good Pods. I've paid practically no attention to Good Pods over the years, but maybe I should. And for the team at Listen Notes, if they should ever see this, even though I'm a teeny tiny small fry, sometimes people do find the things I do there, and I know that. I would love to know more about what you do to show the rankings and how you want us to interact in your ecosphere and what's in it for us, right? Because I managed to be using your website for a decade without ever actually realizing that it was meant to be a search engine. So, if you want to share with us more about how you make these decisions and why you do it, that would be fun for me, but there's no reason for you to do that also, so I understand if you don't. One of the things that I think is potentially significant about Listen Notes and podcast data generally is that some of the data, as far as I can tell, is not actually available publicly, right? So, and that's a problem for fair rankings. And for example, Sirius, I don't think plays in the indie podcast ranking sphere. And where that might matter is that for a long time, right, like Howard Stern was the top shock jock and he got the huge deal on Sirius radio. And now he has a podcast on Sirius, right? I don't think he gets anywhere near the audience that he used to back in the day, but I think I would be curious to know what the reach is for the podcast on Sirius compared to the indie shows like Mel Robbins, Diary of an CEO, Diary of a CEO, Shameless, stuff like that are ranked on these charts, how they're running up against the bigger broadcast channels. Because I would not be surprised to know that some of those shows are thought to have similarly large audiences, but it's maybe that I'm wrong about that because I'm not an expert. But as these silos, as people try harder and harder to keep people within their own ecosystems, and they don't give out as much information to be scraped off the internet, then these ranking systems and the analytics, they maybe are going to become even less accurate than they are right now. And that's not to say that the people who are pulling this data and using it for rankings are doing anything wrong. It's really to shine a light on the fact that there's not enough public information that is out there, and there's not enough reliable information. One of the things in the industry for podcasting is that people talk about, not me, although I am going to talk about it right now, um, a new wave of updated RSS. So RSS 2.0 or open RSS, some of those things. My understanding of RSS is that this is not what RSS was intended to do, this kind of analytics. And so I'm more inclined to say that the real answer to this is something that is not RSS, actually. And one of the things I've said for a while is that this is one of the main advantages for people to create on YouTube, because YouTube is an open platform that's creator first and has a lot more transparency in the analytics for the creators. And so I think that that's a real challenge for the industry. It gets mixed up, guys, because people who really like audio entertainment get really attached emotionally to the concept of podcasts via RSS. But I think it's helpful and maybe significant that we try and keep those two ideas separate. So like, love audio, love indie audio, but don't be married necessarily as tightly to the actual technology if that technology might have an inherent flaw, if that makes any sense. So that's where my thoughts are about this today. I don't think I'm the only person struggling with this process of trying to understand podcast ranking data, wishing for better analytics and things like that. I think it's important for creators. I think it's important for agencies of creators. I think it's important for studios, and I think it's important for ad agencies and companies who want to work with brands and individuals on audio and other platforms. I think that specific to advertising, which tends to be what moves the needle for a lot of these things, which makes sense, right? You're making a gamble. You say, or a strategic investment, if I invest this amount of dollars, we should get this amount of response. And if you are being analytical about it, there are benchmarks that you go for. So if you have back in the days of direct mail, if I sent 1,000 letters to a clean list, I would expect a certain amount of returns. I would expect a certain amount of phone calls. Then you would drill down and be like, if you did a good job, it should be this amount of response. Take an ad in a newspaper, run an ad on TV. There's similar metrics for that. And with audio, with email, there's metrics too for if you send it to a certain list, you're looking for a response on a certain level to know that it has worked. But if the data about audio podcast and video podcast is wrong on its face, then everything is a guess. And maybe if you're a big, huge company with a bazillion-dollar advertising budget and you are just out there for awareness, you're not spending a lot of time worrying about how accurate the data is. But the smaller businesses, it's going to matter more, and they're going to be more likely to invest and develop quality relationships if the data is better. So I'm not a person who actually does the work of scraping data. I know those words. I don't know how it actually happens. And I don't know if if some of the stuff I've said in this video is correct or not. And so if it's wrong, I invite people to educate me. But if you question me, be prepared, because I'm going to ask you to show your notes and give me your sources. I'm not just going to take it based on faith because you show up in my YouTube comments. And I do wonder, I mentioned this, what happens if the companies who have the data stop dispensing it? There have been several podcasts in the last 60 days that I have looked up who do not appear on Raphonic or in Listen Notes, but they are in Spotify, and they show me their analytics, and they seem to me to have enough activity that I don't know why they're not in either of those platforms. So I mentioned that I'm trying to build a media company, that's my bigger idea past the concept of my show. Part of that is my show. Part of that is that I would love to align and create community with other women creators. And when I say creators, this is part of me moving away from the singular use of the word podcast. I describe what I do now as a streaming show. I will also use the word podcast, but I release simultaneously in audio and video. And I think that there's crossover skills and community that can be forged between people who are creating audio content on audio only or audio first platforms, people who are YouTubers who are creating video first content, and also other places like people who are creating newsletters and filmmakers, broadcast video, people who are doing those things in a variety of things. I think that bringing those skill sets together to create community and peer-to-peer resources is a valuable thing that we can do with and for each other in 2026. I've created the name of my idea. I call it Unmuted, which is a word that's being used a lot right now by women in podcasting and streaming. And the way I want to do that is definitely built on a platform of transparency and honesty. And if you want to know more about the ideas of what I'm working for, I'm recording this video in first quarter 2026. My goal at the time I record this is to have a lot of conversations, as many as I can, with women who are out there on these internet streets creating podcasts and streaming shows, to talk to them about what they're working on and what would be helpful and what would be supportive, and see if it aligns with my thoughts and my experiences as well, and then how we can support each other. And that's what I'm working on now. And if that's you, I hope to hear from you, and I look forward to talking to you. My name is Amy Stone. This is my video on analytics and rankings on audio podcasts, combined with a little love note for the creator of Listen Notes, because he seems like he's a charming dude. Thanks for tuning in. Signing off.